Alright, now imagine this. Two of the biggest film studios in Hollywood, Paramount and 20th Century Fox, decide to gamble hundreds of millions of dollars on a single movie. A film that was late, massively over budget, plagued by production nightmares, and directed by a man who, let's just politely say, was a bit of a perfectionist lunatic. Everyone in Hollywood thought the movie was going to sink faster than the ship it was about. And yet, it became Titanic. Not just a blockbuster, but the highest grossing movie in history at the time. This isn't just a story about making a movie. This is about risk, madness, corporate fear, ego, and ultimately one of the most audacious bets in business history. So grab your life jackets. This is the tale about Titanic. Welcome to the Business Scrapbook, where every business story, iconic founder, rivalry, and marketing genius comes to life. Alright, so picture Hollywood in the mid-1960s. The movie industry was in a bit of a phase, the bigger is better phase. This was the era of films that made you feel like your seat was literally about to take off. Jurassic Park had just stomped onto the screens and made dinosaurs fashionable again. Independence Day was blowing up the White House in glorious slow motion. Studios weren't chasing subtlety, they were chasing spectacle. Explosions, dinosaurs, aliens. If you weren't spending the GDP of a small European nation on your movie, were you even trying? Now, into this world strolls James Cameron. And James Cameron? Well, calling him a director is a bit like calling Usain Bolt a little bit quick on his feet. He was part filmmaker, part engineer, part mad scientist, and 100% control freak. This is a man who builds his own cameras if the existing technology annoys him. This is a man who insists on learning deep sea diving so he can personally film wrecks on the ocean floor. This is a man who probably sharpens his pencils with a laser. But his track record up until this point was basically flawless. He'd given us Terminator, a small budget movie with huge impact. Aliens, the sequel that somehow managed to outshine the original. The Abyss, which nearly killed half the cast members but gave us groundbreaking effects. And Terminator 2, which was the most expensive movie ever made at the time and worth every penny. When James Cameron pointed a camera at something, box offices rang like cash registers at Christmas. So, what's next for him? Well, Cameron starts developing an obsession with the Titanic. And when I say obsession, I mean the man was literally spending all his free time diving down and seeing the real wreck. While most directors spend their time unwinding by playing a bit of golf or doing a bit of yoga, Cameron straps himself into a submarine, dives 2 miles under the sea just for research. And during these dives, he starts thinking, this isn't just a shipwreck, this is a story. This is a story about class, hubris, romance, tragedy, and of course, a big icy death trap. But here's the clever twist. Cameron doesn't pitch it as some dreary historical drama. He sells it with the line, Romeo and Juliet on a boat. And you have to hand it to him. It's genius. Shakespeare plus disaster equals box office success. On one hand, you've got the sweeping romance to lure in the lovebirds. On the other, you've got an actual ship splitting in half for the spectacle junkies. It was perfect. It was date night and demolition derby in one film. Now, the problem is, Cameron doesn't do things by halves. He wasn't going to settle for a few dodgy model ships in the bathtub. Oh no. He wanted to rebuild the Titanic, full scale, in Mexico. So, he walks into 20th Century Fox with his idea. Now you can imagine the room. On one side, you have the executives nodding nervously, half excited, half terrified. On the other side, you have Cameron, eyes blazing with the intensity of a man who'd happily bankrupt them if it meant getting the right shade of ocean water on screen. Now, most studios would have smiled politely, offered him a nice cup of coffee, and quietly escorted him out of the building. But this is the 90s, the golden age of risky bets. And Fox says yes, and later, to share the burden of the rising costs, rope in Paramount. The deal was simple. Paramount gets US distribution, and Fox gets the rest of the world, and together they'll foot the bill. Now, things were manageable at this point. Just a modest budget of $100 million US. Big, but not insane. After all, Cameron has proven himself time and time again, hasn't he? And what could possibly go wrong? Well, everything, but we'll get to that. Alright, so the studios are in. They shake hands, the contracts are signed, Cameron's got the green light, and somewhere an accountant quietly starts hyperventilating. The initial budget? Around $100 million, which was jaw-dropping at the time. Keep in mind, this is 1995 money we're talking about. That's like saying we'll spend enough that if you stack all the bills, you'll probably need a plane ticket just to reach the top. But because Cameron made Terminator 2 work on a monster budget, everyone thought, it's fine, we'll trust him, after all he's earned it. Spoiler, Cameron was about to make them regret those words. See, Cameron doesn't just want a film, he wants an experience. So he demands a full-scale replica to be built of the Titanic in Baja, Mexico. Not a model, not a digital mock-up, a bloody great ship. They had to construct the entire dock and water tank the size of several football pitches just to hold it. And then, because Cameron is a perfectionist, he starts fussing about the details. The plates in the dining hall, the wood carvings on the walls, even the bloody light fixtures. Imagine going to IKEA with Cameron. It would take him several days just to pick out the screws. Now this level of madness costs money, mountains of it. And suddenly, the $100 million budget creeps up. $120 million, $140 million, $160 million. Executives start sweating through their suits, and by the time it hits $200 million, it officially becomes the most expensive movie in history. Now, to keep perspective, $200 million in the 90s was unheard of. The studios weren't just nervous, they were terrified. One Fox executive described the project as a runaway train with no brakes, and the press were having a field day. Headlines like "Titanic sinking before it even launches" started popping up. The irony was irresistible. And let's not forget, the production itself was a nightmare. The cast spent endless nights in freezing cold water tanks, catching colds left and right. Crew members were complaining about Cameron being a tyrant on set, and at one point, someone allegedly spiked the soup with PCP, sending dozens of people into hospital with hallucinations. What other film has a drugging incident in its production history? Meanwhile, Cameron's behaviour with the studios wasn't exactly diplomatic. When executives suggested that he should cut corners or trim the budget, he basically told them to sod off. At one point, Fox was so worried about the cost they tried to rein him in. And famously, Cameron replied, "You want to cut my movie? You have to fire me and find someone else." And let's be honest, no one in Hollywood was mad enough to take over a half-finished Titanic from James Cameron. And so the executives were trapped. They can't stop the train, but they can't get off it either. It's like watching someone drive your Rolls Royce into a swimming pool and being powerless to stop them. Right, so by the time Titanic crawls into late 1997, this thing was already the biggest gossip topic in Hollywood. Everyone's whispering, everyone's smirking, and if you walked into a studio lot and mentioned James Cameron, half the room would roll their eyes and mutter something unprintable. Let's tally it up. The budget? Officially over $200 million. And that's not just expensive, that's mortgage the studio, sell the office furniture, and hope the interns don't notice we can't afford coffee anymore expensive. And the worst part? By 1997, when the movie should have been finished, it wasn't. The release date had to be delayed from summer to December. For a studio, that's basically waving a giant flag saying this thing's a disaster. And to make matters worse, December was crowded with competition, including James Bond's Tomorrow Never Dies. So now, not only are Fox and Paramount bleeding money, they're heading into a showdown with Britain's suavest secret agent. The press were absolutely frothing. Industry journalists started calling it the Ship of Fools or Cameron's Folly. Some even predicted it was going to become the biggest flop in cinema history. You could basically hear the laughter echoing around Hollywood boardrooms. And it wasn't just the media. The studios were going into full panic mode too. Executives were terrified. There were stories of emergency meetings where they openly admitted, "We're about to lose everything on this." You've got to imagine the vibe. It's like watching a very expensive car crash in slow motion. Everyone knows it's going to hit the wall. The only question is, how spectacular will the wreck be? And let's not forget the on-set horror stories that were trickling out. Cast members were getting hypothermia because Cameron insisted on shooting for hours in near-freezing waters. Kate Winslet, who was a relative newcomer at the time, later admitted that she thought she was going to drown on multiple occasions. And then there was Cameron himself. Perfectionist doesn't even begin to cover it. It's more like a general leading his troops into battle. He'd shout, he'd demand retakes, he'll push the crew to breaking point. One crew member described the set as like being in a war zone but with nicer costumes. And remember that PCP soup incident? That actually happened. Someone, to this day no one knows who, laced the clam chowder served to cast and crew with angel dust. Suddenly, dozens of people were hallucinating, vomiting, being rushed to hospital. Even Cameron himself was stabbed in the face with a pen by someone tripping out. If you pitch that in the script, they'll likely have that cut out for being too unrealistic. So, from the outside, the Titanic looked cursed, expensive, chaotic, and saddled with a December release that had it going head-to-head with Tomorrow Never Dies. A suave James Bond movie versus a 3-hour wheat fest about a sinking boat. The bookmakers weren't taking any bets. They were already calling the funeral. Even Paramount's own distribution head later publicly admitted that they were dreading the opening weekend. The best case scenario? It would sink quickly, they would lose a few $100 million and everyone would quietly move on. It was a textbook definition of a gamble gone wrong. Everything about Titanic screamed an impending catastrophe. And yet, amidst all this doom and gloom, James Cameron kept going, single-minded, obsessive. He even gave up his director's salary when the budget ballooned to keep the film afloat. He literally bet his paycheck on the ship not sinking. It was madness, the type of madness that either destroys you completely or makes you immortal. And when Titanic finally hit the cinemas in December, no one could have predicted what happened next, not even Cameron himself. So, it's December 1997. The doom merchants are sharpening their quills, the studios are biting their nails, and James Cameron was probably still somewhere yelling about lighting levels. Then, the film comes out. Now let's be clear, Titanic didn't exactly explode onto the scene like a Marvel movie does today. It opened decently, respectably. It generated around $28 million on its opening weekend, which by blockbuster standard was fine. Not great, not bad, nothing to make Fox and Paramount start popping champagne. And here's the twist. Unlike most films that peak in their first week and then nosedive faster than a drunk pigeon, Titanic did the opposite. Week after week, it kept making money. By week 2, the numbers had barely dropped. By week 3, word of mouth had started kicking in. And by week 4, it was still #1. It just didn't stop. It was like watching a marathon runner who refuses to get tired. Every weekend, people kept going back. And not just once. Some people were watching it 5, 6, 7 times. Especially teenage girls. Entire flocks of them were spending every Saturday in the cinema. weeping and swooning over Leonardo DiCaprio. Guys named Jack across the world probably had the best year of their lives. And while teenagers were buying tickets for Leo, the adults were buying tickets for the spectacle, the sinking sequence. That painstaking, terrifying half hour where the ship goes down has never before been seen on that scale. People weren't just entertained, they were stunned. Cinema audiences sat there with their jaws open as the ship they knew were doomed cracked in half and slid into the icy abyss. By January, something extraordinary was happening. Titanic wasn't fading, it was growing. Valentine's Day rolled around, and suddenly couples everywhere around the world thought, what could be more romantic than 3 hours of aristocrats drowning? Apparently a lot of people thought this because the cinemas were packed. And the soundtrack. Let's not forget Celine Dion belting out My Heart Will Go On. That song was everywhere. You couldn't turn on a radio without hearing it. It climbed, it sold millions, and permanently glued itself to every single karaoke playlist until the end of time. Love it or hate it, that song became the emotional spine of the movie, and another reason people kept returning. By March, the studio's panic had turned into disbelief. By April, disbelief had turned into wild celebration. By the end of its theatrical run, Titanic had made over $2 billion worldwide. That's more money than any other movie in history. It didn't just break records, it completely obliterated them. And then came awards season. If the money wasn't enough, Titanic swept the Oscars. 14 nominations, 11 awards, Best Picture, Best Director. Cameron stood on stage and held his Oscar up high and yelled, "I'm king of the world." Which, let's be honest, was equal parts triumphant and a little bit cringe, but he wasn't wrong. And the executives who thought they were going to be fired, suddenly they looked like geniuses, and their careers got a golden boost. Paramount and Fox made enough money to cover years of past flops, and Cameron became untouchable. The man could have walked in the next day and pitched Romeo and Juliet on Mars with dinosaurs, and someone would have signed that check. The cultural impact? Massive. Titanic fever was everywhere. People learned trivia about the ship, the actors, the costume. Every girl in school wanted to be Rose, and every guy tried, badly, to sketch someone like one of their French girls. It wasn't just a movie, it was a moment. And think about it, this film was supposed to sink harder than the real Titanic, and instead it rise higher than anything Hollywood had ever seen before, from certain doom to global domination, like a phoenix rising from the iceberg, if you will. So, Titanic didn't just make money, it changed the game. And here's the bit that belongs in our little business scrapbook. The real story isn't in the film itself, it's the bet. Now think about it. Paramount and Fox, two of the biggest players in Hollywood, put everything on the line for a movie that everyone thought was doomed. It was the corporate version of roulette, and they had put all their chips on James Cameron. A man who, let's be honest, had the temperament of a caffeinated Viking and the spending habits of a toddler in a sweet shop. From a business standpoint, it was insanity. Every rule of corporate risk management was broken. Budgets doubled, schedules collapsed. The PR was toxic. Any sane boardroom would have pulled the plug, but they didn't. They let it ride out. And here's the clever bit. The gamble didn't just pay off, it redefined what was possible. Suddenly, a $200 million budget wasn't seen as madness. It was seen as the cost of ambition. And studios realized, sometimes to win big, you have to risk big. You can almost draw a straight line from the Titanic's success to the era of billion-dollar blockbusters that we have today. The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, The Dark Knight, the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, all of them owe a little something to the lesson that Cameron taught Hollywood, and that is spectacle sells if you do it with conviction. But let's not get too rose-tinted. For every Titanic, there's a Waterworld, there's a John Carter. Bold bets don't always pay off, but when they do, they change everything. And Cameron? He became the poster boy for audacity in Hollywood. He walked away from Titanic not just richer, but untouchable. He had the biggest movie in history and an Oscar haul to match. Hollywood is a place that loves winners, and for a while, Cameron became the biggest winner of them all. That is, of course, until he did it all again with Avatar. But that's another story. So, maybe the moral is this. Sometimes the ship does sink, yes, but if you bet right on the story, on the vision, on the madman with the submarine obsession, maybe your business will float higher than anyone thought possible. If nothing else, at least you'll end up with the best karaoke song of all time. But remember, sometimes the ship has to sink for the business to float. And that's today's story from the Business Scrapbook. Subscribe to keep uncovering tales behind the brands you love or love to hate.